There's been a tremendous amount of information, numerous webinars, numerous white papers and presentations, on what CMC is. And, by now, most of us know it's five levels that based on the sensitivity of the information that you handle. We know that level 3 is the minimum level that you need to achieve if you're handling controlled but unclassified information, or CUI. And we know that at level 3, there's 130 practices and 3 processes that need to be certified. And unlike NIST 800-171, where you self-attest and self-report, yet now you need to be assessed by an independent CMMC third-party assessment organization, or a C3PAO. And that certification is a requirement to be awarded or to participate or be included on every government or any DoD contract. And really, that's kind of the easy part. We know that CMMC requirements are exacting, and rightfully so. As CMMC addresses a national security imperative to curb the theft of CUI from the information systems of government contractors and subcontractors. And that's most of us that are attending this session today. And theft of our information that belongs to us or is entrusted with us on behalf of the government and stolen by our adversaries. And because CMMC requirements are exacting, satisfying those 130 practices and 3 processes can seem daunting, especially if you're a small or a medium-sized business. So today, rather than telling you what CMMC is, our objective is to help you know how you can make the journey to CMMC certification understandable, manageable, achievable, and equally important, affordable. The CMMC's mission is critical, and it affects all of us. And today, we hope to help you understand not what CMMC is, but how you can demystify and simplify the process of achieving CMMC certification. So let me introduce myself. My name is Stuart Itkin, and I am Vice President of CMMC and FedRAMP Assurance at Coal-Fire Federal. And Coal-Fire Federal is the leading FedRAMP C3PAO. We're also a CMMC C3PAO and CMMC RPO, which means we have the ability to both provide advisory services to organizations preparing for CMMC, as well as to be able to perform assessments for organizations. Of course, conflict of information requirements preclude us doing the same thing for the same client. I was previously VP of Product Management and Marketing at ExoStar and the Global Chief Marketing Officer at the Corporate Executive Board, now a part of Gartner Group. Joining me today, first, let me introduce Randy Batat. Randy is the co-founder of Prevail. And Prevail provides a simple, inexpensive, end-to-end encrypted SaaS platform for storing and sharing CUI and ITAR data in email and files. Randy was previously CEO of Arvana, an innovator in 3G and 4G LTE cellular technology, and previously worked with Motorola and at Apple. He holds a BS in electrical engineering from Stanford University. And finally, our third panelist today is Regan Edens. And Regan is a combat special forces veteran, a former intelligence officer. And today, Regan splits his time between his role as Chief Transformational and Compliance Officer at DTC Global and as a director on the board of directors of the CMMC accreditation body, where he also chairs the Standards Committee and is the vice chair of the Training Committee. DTC Global, Regan's company, is a firm that helps organizations and accelerate their path toward compliance. So let me briefly touch on the agenda today. And we'll start with Regan, who is going to, we can have the next slide, please, who's going to help us put the pieces to achieving CMMC compliance together, starting by talking about the 10 tasks to get us focused with CMMC compliance, critical areas to focus on, and 5 critical enablers. And as I mentioned earlier, CMMC requirements are exacting, and the technology solutions you choose do have an impact on how simple or how difficult and how expensive it is to satisfy certain requirements for CMMC. Randy Vitat will tell us about a cloud-based encryption file sharing and email solution that is specifically designed for making satisfying CMMC requirements simple. After the presentations and discussion, we'll have a Q&A session to address questions submitted by the audience and to provide an opportunity for people to continue to speak with Randy and with Regan. We will continue to leave the channel open at the end of the session at the top of the hour for you to be able to continue the conversation if you have specific questions. And so first, before we get started, Regan, I'd like to thank you for your service. And I have a question for you. I'm always kind of amazed when I look at the things that you're doing. You certainly have more than a full plate. And so how do you balance the roles between leading DTC Global and your role as director of CMMC accreditation body? I mean, certainly their missions, they're both similar, but they're different. And so how do you avoid conflicts between the two?
Well, thanks, Stuart, and thanks for the introduction, and also thanks to Prevail for having me. That's a great question. And for me, I think it really boils down to mission. So, as part of my DNA raised in the special operations community, the national security interest has really been paramount throughout my entire career, both as a active duty and government civilian, as a contractor, and of course in service now. So I think for me, the balance has been really putting the national security interest as the paramount goal and the paramount drive. And for when you balance out the duties and responsibilities between meeting that national security interest and in my volunteer role on the CMMC accreditation body, we always have to look at the goals and the mission that the DoD has entrusted us with at the accreditation body. So, the community that I was raised, leaders always serve first and eat last, right? So I think that you always put the mission before your personal interest. It's just really, truly been the way that I've raised, and it's probably a defining attribute of just really my entire adult life. But I think that when we look at the balancing out for DTC Global, that industry experience that I am fortunate enough to have really the last 4 or 5 years in the trenches, really in the technical details, from very large organizations to very, very small organizations. I think that's been an opportunity because we've been rolling out this CMMC ecosystem so fast and so quickly that we've been, all of the members who are directors have been able to leverage our personal experience and also our interests as stakeholders. I mean, this matters to us, both in the national security interest, in a matter of professional interest, but also the fact that we have a vested interest in the sweat equity that we put into this mission. Last year, I think over the first 8 months, there were over 4,000 volunteer hours between myself and the industry working group that I lead for as the chairman of the Standards Management Committee, in helping to refine and contribute to the improvements to the CMMC assessment guide that was recently released in December. So when you put that many hours into, it's really it's a passion project. And I think that at the end of the day, that acknowledging the fact that, of course, DTC Global provides professional services for companies seeking to be DFARS 7012 compliant and hopefully one day CMMC. But at the end of the day, really, that mission really defines everything that we do, and really that mission at the CMMC accreditation body always comes first, and right. So everything else takes a back seat.
Understand, Regan, and you made the point of volunteer hours, and I appreciate the importance of CMMC's mission. I appreciate the work that you and others on the accreditation body board have done, and recognize, again, this has been all volunteer effort on your part, a tremendous effort, and thank you for that on behalf of, I think, the entire community. So let me kind of start with a question. Again, when we look at CMMC, and it's big, I kind of look at it, and it's like an elephant. And they say, the way to eat an elephant is, like a piece at a time. So when you look at the CMMC elephant, where should somebody start?
Well, the challenge here is, I think that the beauty of expertise should be able to take something very complex and try to make it simple, right? And so we have spent an enormous time. That 4,000 hours really pales in comparison to the total amount of time to the board, and also in my professional career as well, in trying to simplify and bring simplicity to this process. The one of the major challenges is the fact that the ecosystem is so brand new, right? And it's being the overall effort is being rolled out very quickly, and so much is not known or misunderstood about the NIST 800-171 requirements. And so we've worked very, very hard to simplify and to keep people focused on what's most important. It is compliance, so the devil is in the details. But at the end of the day, I think that this podcast will lead to future podcasts about really truly bringing simplicity to the task.
Right. So where do you start?
Yeah. So if we go to one of the slides I prepared, we start there. So we've got 130 practices and 400 plus assessment objectives, and you have to meet compliance with all of them in order to be certified. So without being overwhelmed, what we do is we take this apart piece by piece, and we tried to simplify it, looking at the top 10 tasks. What are the most important things that you as a small and mid-sized business can really keep focused on? One is that you always have to remember that documentation is paramount, that the risk and security assessment, the plan of action milestones, and the system security plan are absolutely essential for you to document, to provide evidence of meeting those requirements. So that's where all of this begins. Once you understand where your gaps are, then you can really look at the technologies and the activities that you need to do in order to meet 7012 requirements and in order to certify underneath CMMC. So documentation is number one. It's absolutely necessity, and those have to be done annually, of course. Now, all of this focus is really about CUI. So you always have to remember that the next most important thing is in the documentation is, what is the information that we're going to protect? So CUI and, of course, federal contract information, but principally the CUI is about the information, the technical data that we need to do in order to provide the products and services that we've been contracted to do or subcontracted to do, and in order to deliver either services, parts, or products back to our customer. Now, our customer may be a prime, it may be another subcontractor. It also might be DoD directly. So remembering that information is most important to keep track of, and to know where it goes in order so that we can control that information where it flows. That is the cornerstone. That's the cornerstone of all these requirements. What is the data that I need to protect? And then where does it go inside my organization? And where does it go outside my organization? Now, when we know that, then we can really look at restricting and segregating that data and really safeguarding it. So that's the principal focuses of all the technical requirements, right? Remember that it is cybersecurity. So all of the technical requirements are really focused on restricting, segregating, and handling that data, whether that's digital or whether that's, physical documents and that sort of thing. And then the second most important piece on the documentation piece is to have the proper policies and procedures that you need to tell me what to do as an employee, tell me what I need to do as a supervisor, supervising my employees, and telling us collectively within our daily workflow, how is that information governed? How is it and how are those activities enforced and monitored? So those are the principal things that really begin everything else. We look at the initial documentation that's required. We look at looking at CUI and FCI. We look at implementing the requirements to segregate and safeguard, and then we look at modifying, developing and modifying the policies and procedures that we need to govern our activities every single day in the workflow. So the next slide, I think, is the next 5 tasks really fall into play pretty quickly. So on the next 5 tasks, everyone needs to understand what they need to do. So I, as an employee, need to understand my responsibilities. So how do I handle the data? What do I need to do? And in my day-to-day tasks, and then what are the policies and procedures that tell me what I need to do, and what are the limits to stay within the requirements. The next piece is that ultimately, if I need, or we need as an organization, need to hand out that data in order to execute tasks or work with our subcontractors. So where does that data go? And then how do we communicate that data? That's really important. The next piece really is monitoring it. So we have to monitor all of the requirements in order to ensure that they are being done, in order to ensure that they are being enforced, right? And then at this point, we need to always remember that 100% conformity is required. So if we have good documentation, if we have a solid understanding of what the requirements are, if we've trained our employees, and then being able to monitor the enforcement and the practice of those requirements, we're really in a good position to really understand how do we sustain those requirements. And then, of course, the reporting requirements when accidents happen, and they will. What happens when CUI is compromised in some way, or there's an incident on my network. So those really are the top 10 things that you need to do when you're looking at the CMMC requirements. You can be easily overwhelmed when you're sort of looking at the assessment guide, or you're looking at NIST 800 and sort of like, I can't make heads or tails of this. And of course, acknowledging that is really the first step to, okay, what are my main tasks and what are my responsibilities?
And it sounds like it goes beyond an organization knowing simply what to do, but for them to understand why they're doing it and why it's important, and really focusing on developing more of a security culture, kind of looking at cyber maturity as the objective rather than simply compliance, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would. So think about it in terms of our everyday lives, right? So most people are not cybersecurity experts, right? But they know that they have to protect their credit card data. They know that they have to protect their PIN and passwords, right? They understand that they've got to put some software on their computers that they use, and because if we don't protect that data can be used against us. It can be used financially to wound us, and of course, misuse of that data can cause all sorts of legal ramifications. Those are the same principles that we're applying, that we've learned the hard way in our personal lives, that we're applying to our business. So when we think about in terms of our responsibilities as a DoD contractor or as a subcontractor, we think, what do I make for that contractor? What do I provide as a service for that contract? How do I protect that data responsibly to protect my country, to protect my business interests, and to protect our own ability to win more business, right, at the end of the day? So I think that if you think about it in terms of that, you don't really get overwhelmed, or you can avoid getting overwhelmed about the fact that I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I can barely turn on a computer. That's okay. That there are experts out there. But I think if you grasp the fundamentals, that helps you begin to not be overwhelmed and to really simplify your path towards compliance.
And I know when we talked earlier, you said that there's some critical areas where organizations should then focus.
Yep. So that's when I take these 10 things that we need to do together, right? Then the next thing is okay, well, where do I focus those 10 tasks? Because now I'm thinking, okay, do I start with the IT guys? Well, where does this all begin? So at the end of the day, the requirements follow the data. So I need to think about this conceptually in just simple terms, right? Easy, simple, straightforward. How do I get the data? Where does the data go inside my organization? And that may be all the way from, my business development guys, my sales guys, my operations folks, all the way through to my shipping and receiving, my quality folks, folks that do non-destructive testing, my operations, my maintenance folks, all of those people. You noticed I haven't mentioned any IT people, because the IT folks provide the backbone, but the information flows through the organization in our daily workflow according to our responsibilities. So we think about that. When we think about that, we think about, okay, how do I limit where that information flows so that only the people who need to get it can get it? So that really helps us narrow the scope, and that's really what we want to do. We want to control the flow of the information, the CUI, And then we want to narrow the scope in terms of who touches that information and who needs it. And what devices, when we think about network, what devices on our network really need that data. And then, of course, outside of our organization, then to whom do we really need to share that data? And then how can we do that in a compliant way? So that's where we get really to the network and where we get really to the IT guys. So if we do this homework up front, then we could tell the IT guys, look, these are the devices that we absolutely need to put in play, okay? These are the people that really do need to touch that data, both, physically, right? And also digitally. And so when we've done that, now we can say, okay, now what do we need to do to really get that, get our network and our devices compliant? Good. Sure.
And I was going to say that, that organizations don't need to do this on their own. And I know one of the things you said is, seek help in somebody who kind of has taken that journey already.
Yeah, I agree. As we work towards simplifying, right? The reality is that most small and mid-sized businesses, which is the reason why I started doing this, is the concern that they would just be steamrolled, right? Most small and mid-sized businesses don't have IT experts. They certainly don't have cybersecurity experts, and they've got a friend or one of their workers who is talented in that arena, or maybe nobody at all. They just switch hats and now they're the IT person, right? So the reality is you can't expect to have this expertise. And just as the DoD or a prime contractor sought you out for your expertise, the recommendation is in order to understand these requirements, you get someone who is helpful and reliable, and their job isn't to sell you something, right? Because at the end of the day, if I sell you something, I want to sell you my something. So for us, as we mature the ecosystem and as we train more and more people to understand these requirements, and I've been criticized for this, but I think I want to be transparent and honest. Going to Google and trying to do it yourself is not your friend. 100% conforming standard is a very tall order. And so if I've got a multi-million-dollar contract at risk, we're not going to DIY. We're not going to try to build a house in my spare time, right? That to me is a substantial risk to my family, to my mortgage, to my other employees, to us meeting our goals and objectives for that year. So seek out reliable experts that can support your needs. You need to do it on budget, and you need to do it on a time that in order to meet your requirements for your contracts. But you are absolutely going to do yourself a favor in order to seek out the appropriate help. When you do that, they can impart knowledge on you. They can train your people, and they should be teaching you how to fish. They should not be giving you fish. So the consultant should not be about keeping you on the leash for forever. That's not the goal of this. The goal of this is to impart wisdom, knowledge, and experience, get you compliant as quickly as possible, up the appropriate amount of time, and then let you get back to your folks focused on your products and services.
Right. But who you do choose, is important, I think, as you said, in the keyword experience. It's like, if you had to have an operation, you wouldn't want the doctor who is doing his first one. You'd probably want the one that's already done 5,000, and somebody who has that. I agree. I think that's important.
Yeah, when the bridge is sort of the third point, and the third point is, so we have the top 10 tasks, we have our focus areas, and now we look at, okay, who are the enablers? And so your question is a great one. So you need reliable expertise and guidance. We've already covered that. That's the reason why it's really highlighted. You need help, right, to bring those pieces of the puzzle, to simplify it, and to bring those pieces of the puzzles and solve the puzzle. Because ultimately, our goal is not to be CMMC experts. Eventually, you want to build that expertise, but your goal is to get back focused on your products and services and get focused back on what you do that really brings value to the defense industrial base. So when we think about it in terms of the enablers, we control the CUI, where it goes, and we limit the scope. So that's super critical. We think of it in terms of data management, both in real world data management, and we think of it in terms of data management in your IT network. And if you don't have an IT network, you just got a couple endpoints and laptops, then the reality is that we want to limit that scope, and we want what you do in your real life to match what you're documenting and the way that you're going to handle it in real life. That's really, really important. So your workflow has to match your reality. All right. Supply chain, we talked about that. We also need to remember that when you're looking at the data management piece, bridging over to the technologies, it's absolutely critical that you choose technologies that are going to get you there. And if you're not familiar with the technologies that you're going to invest in, because most organizations, small and mid-sized businesses, they think in terms 5 to 7 years, right?
Yep.
So now let's make the investment in the right technologies, not just buy things to buy things. So choose compliant technologies and really look at the service providers who, again, along with your experts, know what they're doing. They're providing technologies that are going to get you compliant and to support these requirements. And at the end of the day, a smarter strategy is a wiser strategy, because it will reduce your risk and it will take you well on the way to expedite and simplify your path to compliance.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And it was coincidentally, I had spoken with the gentleman at DCMA earlier this week, who's responsible for doing DIBCAC assessments. And we talked about the biggest challenges that organizations faced in satisfying NIST 800-171 requirements, and looking forward CMMC requirements. And invariably said, the two things always on the list: multi-factor authentication, and encryption. And he talked about it in the context of organizations needing to go and make the solutions they have in place compliant from an encryption standpoint. And so maybe let me switch the conversation over. And Randy, I know that encryption is an area that Prevail has focused on. And so, how is Prevail demystifying CMMC encryption requirements for small and medium businesses?
Thank you, Stuart. I'd love to dive into that, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I know also, just want to add that I know that there are folks from a lot of different kinds of organizations joining us today, some from university research departments, a lot of folks from small and mid-sized subcontractor businesses, and even a few primes. Let me share my screen and get to answering that question, as well as some others. I thought I'd dive a little bit into the role of systems in compliance. Building off of what Regan had said, systems are a piece of the puzzle, but not the entire puzzle, right? So of the 130 plus practices, they break into 17 domains. I've listed them all here. And systems and technologies and the platforms that you use can address a lot of what's in the green, maybe not 100%, but a lot of what's in the green, some of what's in the yellow, and probably not much in the blue, where you have to have organizational processes and policies to take care of things and be compliant. Some considerations when making a system or platform or technology decision, especially when you're thinking of what you use to store CUI or to communicate CUI with internal or external parties. And obviously compliance tops the list. That's what we're talking about today. But it's important to note that most commercial cloud services are not compliant. They just simply don't have the protection or reporting requirements or incident response requirements that are necessary for dealing with controlled unclassified information. You could implement systems on-prem, in which case you're up for it. But for example, the Google applications, Microsoft 365, Box, Dropbox, all these standard commercial versions are not compliant. Sometimes, like in the Microsoft case, they will offer a compliant special version that you can use. Another important consideration is deployment options. What I mean by this is, some organizations are 100% DoD focused, and much of their organization involves exchanging CUI. So you can make a single platform decision across your entire organization, and it'll serve everybody. More often is the case that, we find businesses and university research shops where only a portion of what they're doing involves the exchange of controlled unclassified information. And you can wall off those parts of the organization, some people call those enclaves, that are secure for CUI. But you have to think about that up front. Can the platform that you're using support that kind of enclave environment, and what do you need to wrap around it to be compliant? Or is it an all or nothing kind of decision? Security. Obviously, everything we're talking about is security, but there are new technologies that emerge every day. And if you're going to deploy some new systems, you might as well pick those that offer the absolute state of the art in security. So you're really ahead of the game and can not only sleep at night knowing that you're compliant, but you can sleep at night knowing that your systems are secure. Ease of use and adoption. Historically, there's been a trade-off between ease of use and security. If you wanted it to be secure, it most certainly was not easy to use. That's starting to change. And of course, it's important to note that if it's not easy enough to use, your users won't go for it, and the job of compliance becomes that much harder. And then finally, cost, a very important consideration, but really peel back the cover to understand the total cost of ownership, because some systems require forklift upgrades. You got to swap out everything you got and redeploy something new, which often means hiring a lot of external resources or tapping a bunch of internal resources to go make the swap, train people, upgrade everything, and so forth. And there are often lower cost ways that don't require as much change on the organization. So these are a few things to consider. Let me tell you a little bit about our company, Prevail. Prevail is a cloud-based service for file storage and sharing, as well as email. And what's different about it is everything is encrypted end-to-end all the time. That means all the information on the server is encrypted 100% of the time, so that if anybody breaks into the server, this is way more than encryption at rest or encryption in transit, it's all the time. So it means if somebody breaks into the server, they're not gonna see anything but gibberish. And it's compatible with the requirements for CUI and even the State Department's requirements for ITAR restricted data on cloud services, which very few are, because you need end-to-end encryption for that. I saw a question in the Q&A that asked about DFARS 7012, flow down, C through G, and Prevail is compatible with that as well. It's also one of those things where there's some shared responsibility in terms of your own internal processes and procedures for things like incident reporting and things like that, but it's certainly appropriate for protecting information. Another question I saw was work from home. That's another one of those kind of shared responsibility. Prevail can absolutely be used to communicate CUI in all kinds of environments, but if you put CUI in somebody's home computer, you're also responsible for the other things that are important to secure that computer. Prevail is also very easy to deploy. It doesn't touch any existing infrastructure. So if you have a Google environment, an Office 365 environment, you don't have to touch those existing services or servers. Rather, it's an add-on to those things, and you can use that just for the CUI exchange of CUI, as long as you take the other precautions associated with CMMC. It's super easy to use, and oftentimes it's a quarter to a third the cost of other alternatives. Let me give you a quick demonstration of that. Get out my presentation here. Okay, this is a Prevail running in a Windows computer here. You can see this is Prevail Drive, a place where you can store lots of files, all your information. You can share files in folders with other people. The ones with people in the pictures are ones that are shared with other folks. So here I've got a folder for some customer information. If I click on it in the browser, I can see it's empty. Let's say I want to put this statement of work in there. I just drag and drop. And what it's done now is it's taken that, it's encrypted it, it's put it on the server where it stays encrypted all the time. So you can see I've been interacting with this browser, but really it's the files are all synchronized locally on your computer, and you can access them locally in File Explorer as well. So I just clicked open up File Explorer. Here's the same document. It's a Word document. So you use the applications the way you're used to using them. And maybe I want to change the date here and say Feb 2021. And highlight that change, make it bigger, and save the document. So when I save it, it automatically gets synchronized, updated to the server, again, encrypted all the time. We keep all prior versions of the file in case you need to get back to previous versions. So it's a powerful way to store and manage your own files and documents, but it's also a good way to communicate documents. Let's say I'm working with my customer and I want to share this whole folder with my customer. I just tell it I want to share. I want to add somebody else to this list. I'm going to share it with my good friend Ethel at Acme end-to-end encryption.com. And it knows that Ethel is already a member of Prevail, so it shows that as an orange stripe. If not, you could invite her to join, and you could select multiple sharing permissions. Maybe I don't want her to be able to edit that. I might say read only, or maybe view only. That won't allow her to download it at all. She can only look at that Word file in a browser on the system. Lots of powerful sharing permissions. That's a quick view of Prevail for files, what we call Prevail Drive. Let me show you now the encrypted messaging part of Prevail. So it's an end-to-end encrypted messaging system, not unlike what you see with Signal or WhatsApp, except it's designed for enterprises, but it also can have an email front end to it. So it's not just a completely separate app, it can integrate with the way you do email. So here's Outlook and a regular mail account. We're not going to touch the regular mail account. It's got the usual, marketing stuff in there, the usual somebody trying to spoof you and get your bank account information, all those kinds of things. When you add Prevail to Outlook, it gives you a second inbox automatically. See the second inbox here? It says encrypted. It actually has the same email address. You don't have to have a new special address for your encrypted stuff, but all this is protected with end-to-end encryption. So now I can feel comfortable sharing, emailing company financials, CAD files, and so forth. And you just use Outlook the way you're used to using it. If you want to send a message, you say new message. It pops up as unencrypted. I want to send this to my friend Ed Murphy. All the usual Outlook autocompletes. And you see, notice it just changed. It said encrypted here because it noticed Ed is a member of Prevail. So it assumes I want to send that encrypted. Let's say I want to send it to someone at work.com who's not a member of Prevail. Oh, now there's two kinds of folks in here. We probably ought to send this the unencrypted way. So you see it turned off encryption and lets you know. You can force it one way or the other. You can say, turn on encryption. And if it does that, it reminds you, hey, this someone person is not a member of Prevail. I'm going to send them an email message asking them to join. Of course, you probably want to tell them that in advance. And it's not going to deliver the message until they do, until they have the encryption software. But let's say this is a message with CUI and it's very important. But you're just using Outlook the way you're used to using Outlook. Put that in green and we'll make it super big. And attachments, all these things are encrypted and you just send mail the way you like to send it. You can interact with the encrypted messages in our browser, or you can interact with encrypted messages in Gmail too. Here's a Gmail account that my friend Ed had. Again, regular mail account, but there's a secure messages tab here. And if you can see that, here's the secure messages, and here's the one I just sent to my friend Ed, and I'm just interacting with the regular Google Gmail experience. You can also use a mobile device. Let me show you that. Just device on my screen here.
And so, Randy, while you're bringing that up, let me ask a question.
Yeah.
Because you said this is an enterprise solution, but I know a number of clients that we've worked with do both commercial business and DoD business, and often the DoD business is a small portion of everything the enterprise does. If I'm implementing Prevail as an enterprise solution, does it affect everybody in that organization?
No, it's one of those things, thanks for pointing that out, that you can deploy in an enclave just for those people in your organization that are dealing with CUI.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing that up. I'm just gonna, here's my mobile phone here. As you can see right here, here's the Prevail app. If I open it, we have biometric authentication. So it's looking at my Face ID, and it opened up in the messaging part. Here's that email message that I just sent before. So you can access all your messages, send them, receive them. At the bottom here, there's a tab for Prevail Drive. Remember, I had a folder with customer info, and remember I put a statement of work document in there where I changed the date. All of that stuff is available on your mobile device as well. So it's a quick view of Prevail. But let me wrap up with the security underpinning all this. I said it's good for CUI, but what really separates Prevail apart is the end-to-end encryption and other security mechanisms. Most mail systems, for example, may encrypt in transit, but the information on the server is in plain text. It's there unencrypted. So often the really bad attacks are when the attackers get into, as you can see, any one of 4 different mail servers for this particular message. They could get this message and a whole bunch of others related to an organization. In Prevail, information's encrypted on the client. And as I said, it stays encrypted on the server all the time. It doesn't get decrypted until it gets to its destination. That's why we call it end-to-end encryption. And as a matter of fact, recently at the beginning of the pandemic, the NSA was giving advice to its people for work at home. And the first thing that they suggested as a guideline is, does the service implement end-to-end encryption? Because it's really, kind of the most advanced way to do things and secure information. Prevail doesn't use passwords. Passwords can be guessable. And they can be stolen remotely, and attackers use them to get in from other countries. In Prevail, there's a private key that's stored on your phone or on your computer, and so it's used not only to authenticate the user, but when you receive data, it's that key that's used to decrypt and unlock the data. So that means that there's no password that can be guessed or stolen, by somebody in Iran or North Korea or China to log in as you. We learned of the real damaging nature of admin vulnerabilities with the recent SolarWinds hack. As we know, admins have super user privileges, which means they can reset passwords, control anything that they want. And the SolarWinds attackers, one of the first things they did was they got admin privileges that really gave them the ability to roam around the organizations they decided to attack. Prevail admins can do very invasive things too. They need to from time to time, but they can only do so with permission from people we call approvers. And when you're getting access to data in an encrypted system, it means getting access to the keys. So what happens here is the approvers have only pieces of the keys. No 1 or 2 approvers by themselves can reconstruct the keys. It's only when they get together and agree are the keys necessary to get the data reconstructed, and then the admin can have use of what they're doing. Finally, most systems are open to anybody on the internet. Prevail allows you to wall off just your organization and those of your suppliers and customers, such that if somebody outside that trusted community tries to send a Prevail message or share a file, or somebody inside your organization tries to use Prevail to exfiltrate something, those will be blocked. So to wrap up, some things to think about. Commercial services, most of them are not going to be compliant for CUI and ITAR data. You need to look to those that are. While you're at it, consider advancing your cybersecurity standards to the best technologies around, and think hard about deployment and ease of use, because that will save you a lot of time and money. And while you're at it, we hope you'll give Prevail a look too.
So, and Randy, let me ask, I know that you talked a lot about approvers and admins and so forth, but if we put this into kind of terms of supply chain, and you've got a buyer, you've got somebody on the other side who may be creating a purchase order, receiving a purchase order, how does somebody specifically use, when you look at those roles in business between, say, a prime contractor and a subcontractor, how does that work using Prevail?
Yeah, we have a number of our customers, including primes and subcontractors, that are using Prevail to communicate with each other. And it's actually pretty easy because, first of all, from an economic standpoint, anybody can join Prevail for free. So you can start with a free version and exchange a whole bunch of information, both in encrypted messages and files. And of course, you can protect it and manage the information. So for example, if a prime is working with a subcontractor, they might want to share a folder with their subcontractor. Subcontractor can join for free, install the Prevail software, access the folder. The prime may have said, oh, I want it to be read-only, or it's bi-directional, so they can update bids and things like that. And then when the relationship terminates, the prime can unshare that information, or even can set an expiration date. Hey, 1 year from now at 3 a.m., I want you to terminate this, and the folder will be unshared, and Prevail will do its best to remove that from the subcontractors' computers as well. So it is one of the major use cases for Prevail, is supply chain integration.
And it makes sense. I know one of the things we touched on earlier was with respect to universities with DoD research contracts. And I think, Regan, this is something that I know that DTC has touched on. Can you share a little bit about how it is that you've worked with universities that do have DoD research contracts?
Yeah, so thanks, Stuart. That's in the past, when we look at like a university or institution of academic learning, they've got a significant challenge. And the challenge is that you've got centralized projects, and really, in most instances, decentralized execution. You've got researchers, professors, research assistants that are really distributed across, sometimes globally. And you want to keep that. And sometimes there's the complexity of the ITAR data, being as a component of the DoD research. So, in that instance, you really focus on the fundamentals to simplify it. What you're really focusing is on, okay, how do we provide access, secure and compliant access to the data, a place to store the data that is secure and does meet requirements? How can a decentralized workforce really access that data in a way that really meets the challenges across the globe? The third component is getting the documentation correct. So making sure that the documentation is done at the program level, because that's you've got all of these pieces and components there, and then those policies and procedures that are also part of your documentation are really scripted for the unique requirements associated with the program. For example, you may have a general university policy that's really a wide implementation. But when you focus on CMMC and DFARS requirements in particular, you really want policies and procedures that narrow down to that sort of constituent group, if you will, that does those things and have those unique defining requirements. So I think if you, to sort of summarize, if you descope and limit the access to the information and try to confine it into a small enclave, or with a system like Prevail, which is a great technique to do that. If you have compliant technologies that are supporting you, that allow you for decentralized execution, allow you to store that data and be able to access it and share it in a compliant fashion. And if you also tailor your policies and procedures from sort of the wide implementation or application of the university, and really focus on those unique programs that have that data, that's a real strong start.
Great. So a question, I guess this is more a comment from somebody in the audience, saying Regan is and has been from the get-go a rock star. So I don't know if it's drums or guitar, but we'll add that to your introduction.
I'm just the front man of the band.
So I think a more direct question, and this is one that a lot of people send to have, how long does a typical CMMC analysis take for a small or medium company? And I presume it's the process of starting with identifying your boundary to identifying the gaps and coming up with a plan to remediate those. So typically, what does that cycle look like?
Well, in the early days, when we started this, companies would spend 18 months not getting anywhere, right? Because this is, people start, there's the tyranny of the urgent. Oftentimes when you start with the IT folks, there's a well-intentioned, but it just gets overwhelming. So I think when you really look at simplifying the process, looking at it from a turnkey perspective really does narrow the ability for an organization to do it quickly and efficiently and really affordably. So the average organization takes about 90 days to really go through the documentation process, to be able to execute all the documentation, identify what the gaps that they need to address, and really begin to mobilize the organization to address those gaps. Now, small, mid-sized businesses, they have a challenge, and the challenge is that they're constrained by cash flow. And like every small business, I've started and reorganized and turned around many small, mid-sized companies. So the reality there is that they're always constrained by cash flow. So if you can distribute out those costs over a given period of time, with DFARS 7012, you can do that because you can spread out your cost in a POAM over a given period of time. But that really works against you to some regard because you're really focused on getting back to your products and services. So a turnkey solution really is the most advisable path. Simplify, choose partners, get good expertise. Good. So if you do a little bit of investment up front, you can expedite that path, use that 90 days wisely. And then for those big things that you might have to do, spread those costs out over a period of time.
Understood. And I know a lot of what we talked about was the importance of the technology solutions that you choose, and some of them already satisfy some of the CMMC requirements like encryption, some don't. And I think the term is an inheritance where
right.
you inherit certain controls or satisfying certain controls. So is that a question that somebody should ask when they're looking at individual technology solutions, and either ask the vendor, do you have a mapping of what controls are inherited? Is that something common?
It is absolutely required, but commonly overlooked. Okay. And that by the way, Stuart, that's an existing requirement underneath DFARS 7012, but that is also carried over to CMMC, right? So this is, if anyone should listen, they should listen to this most important piece right now, which is, if you're using external service providers and you're going to put CUI in those external service providers, right? You're going to transmit over email, right? You have to do it in a compliant fashion.
Right.
In Microsoft Office 365 Commercial, not a compliant method, right? So when you think about in terms of sharing, you have to do it in a compliant fashion. A Prevail course meets that requirement. And when you think of in terms of sharing that data, so we can work together in sort of an accessible and compliant location, then you're looking at how do we share that data in a way in the cloud. You have to ask, is the method that we're currently using compliant, and does it meet requirements? Most cloud service providers at the commercial level do not meet those requirements. So if I'm using an internal method, but I'm using an external service like an MSP or an ISP to provide me internet services or help me protect that data, they too must also, that's that inherited piece.
Right.
They too must also be compliant. And not only that, it's an extraordinarily high requirement. So they have to be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent, which is an extraordinary investment. So an organization that hasn't already begun that process is very unlikely to meet those requirements, in the sort of short runway that we have with CMMC. So you need to ask that question, or if you do have CUI in this technical data inside of a cloud environment or inside of one of your cloud applications, do you meet these requirements? Are we sharing that data in a compliant fashion with them and with any other of our internal employees or external subcontractors? And then, of course, are we really are they interested in meeting those requirements? And if not, you need to use that as a sort of a guide to say, you know what, I think I may need to switch providers and then look for compliant providers. That's that sort of that turnkey methodology. When we simplify, we think of terms of limiting the number of external service providers who touch the data, limiting to only those external service providers that are compliant or well on their way to being compliant.
Got it. And so it sounds like an important question for any vendor you're looking at is, do you have a list of what practices or controls are inherited as a consequence of your service?
Absolutely. You know,
Yep.
oh, what are they doing? What do they need to do? And then, of course, what are they doing right now? Are they aware of the requirements?
Right.
And then, of course, if they are aware of the requirements, you know, there are lots of great vendors out there that are FedRAMP moderate equivalent. That's fantastic. You know, but remember that process takes time and dedication.
Got it. So a question, and we've got a lot of questions that have come in, and want to remind everybody that the session will continue after the end of the hour for those that want to interact directly with Regan and with Randy. But question for you, Randy, how do we ensure that CUI on a laptop with access to Prevail and O365 commercial does not accidentally get put on O365 commercial? Can this be covered by policy, or is it a technical solution that's required?
There's a little bit of both. You do have to kind of remind people that there's this is where if you're using Office 365, let's say, and Outlook for mail, this is use the Prevail side for the encrypted CUI, use the Office 365 side for other stuff. As I showed, the Outlook plugin will automatically encrypt based on who you're sending to, so it provides a little bit of extra help there. But you do have to kind of cover it both places.
Got it. And the question is, and it asks, is the Prevail cloud space located in GCC moderate or GCC high? I'm wondering if they meant FedRAMP, but how would you respond to?
Yeah, I saw that question. Prevail is not based on Microsoft GCC. We use Amazon as our backend for cloud storage, and if you tell us you're a CMMC customer, we will put your data in Amazon's GovCloud, which is really what you're referring to, I think, there.
Got it. Okay. Good. And a question, for Regan, and so let me ask you, what is it that that you're specifically doing, if you would point to one thing to really decrease the time and the cost of CMMC compliance for your clients?
Wow, one thing. So the one thing is all about the data. So the first thing that when we work with our clients, the first thing that we do is what sort of CUI that you have, because that's the hardest leg. What's the sort of CUI that you have? Where do you get it? And whom do you share it with? When we start looking at that, we of course look across the organization, and then we pivot right back to the IT guys and say, how do we make the organization and the way that they share the data electronically match? So that really is the linchpin for all of this. And then when we get those two forces working together inside, no matter how big the organization is, when we get those two forces working together, whether they're choosing a turnkey solution, or whether they're using internal resources, when we get those two aligned, then things run very smoothly, and things can, with urgency and priority, things can flow very quickly.
Good. And we've got a question. Somebody asked how they might follow up with me relative to Coal Fire Federal, and presumably anybody who has an interest in following up with Regan and with Randy and Prevail. I think we have a slide that does have contact information, and certainly you should feel free to reach out to any of us as appropriate, either by phone or by email, and certainly happy to engage in further dialogue and questions that we have. We are just at the top of the hour, and so what we'd like to do is to take just about a 2-minute break to provide an opportunity for those that need to move on to other commitments to do so. But Randy and Regan will remain on for as long as we have people with questions, and to be able to answer those questions individually. And I think what we're going to be doing is unmuting everybody at the end of that so that they can directly ask those questions to Randy and Regan. For the rest of you, thank you for joining us today. As I said, contact information appears on the slides. Here, please feel free to reach out to any of us. In response to a question that somebody has raised, a couple of them, this presentation has been recorded. The presentation will be available for replay on the Prevail website, and the slides will be available for download. And you can do that through contacting Prevail or going onto their website. So again, thank you for joining us today. We're going to take about 2 minutes, and then we'll open this up for anybody who wants to continue the dialogue with Randy and with Regan. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
All right. Randy, are you gonna need to get going?
I bought my